take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling, calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones.
Yeah, I can feel it in my bones. Good evening. I'm Reverend Mark Hughes. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, and you caught me again. It is Juxtaposition. It's live at 5:25 here on CCTV. We're on Channel 17 tonight. For those of you who are watching, I'm trying to figure out what that feedback loop looks like, and the name of the program today is Third Reconstruction. Third Reconstruction. Some folks probably remember in your history. Well, probably most people don't remember because they don't really teach Reconstruction in our history books, do they? But Reconstruction, a period following the Civil War from roughly about 1865, and some say to somewhere around 1877. 1877, where I believe it was Rutherford B. Hayes in Tilden were in a what we call a Bush-Gore-hung-Chad moment in the elections. And to settle this election, the then Abolition Party Republicans made a deal with the Democrats that they would take the White House, but they would pull the troops out of the South, which caused the collapse of Reconstruction. What was Reconstruction? What was going on in the South is we're rebuilding. But we know of the Freedmen's Bureau, which started housing and education and employment and medical programs in the South. During this period of time, this 12-year period, African Americans, those who were formerly enslaved, gained more power and property, owned more land, ran more businesses, newspapers, and so forth, and had more political and economic power, that is to say, within the state government, within the federal government, had more political and economic power than any time in history to include today. So from that point, we as a nation digressed. That's what they don't teach you in history. So it's not true that we've been on a trajectory towards improvement throughout all history and we just keep getting better and better, and then sometimes we just have minor setbacks. No, that's not true at all. Actually, the same thing happened somewhere around the Civil Rights era, maybe around 1968, after the assassinations of many of our civil rights leaders. Before we move too much further, I would be remiss to leave out the point that we plunged into what we call convict leasing, black codes, the constitutional amendments, a rollback towards Jim Crow, lynching, the Ku Klux Klan, and the like. So there was a huge digression that we made as a nation. So with the civil rights era, again, we can talk a little bit about the assassinations of not just civil rights leaders, but also elected officials, just like Lincoln, for example, being assassinated. But then again, there was the criminalization of black activism as well as the incarceration of black activism. There are still political prisoners. Yes, political prisoners today. Some have been run out of the nation. We've got some folks who are activists, black activists, still living in countries outside of the United States today. Many were killed as well. But what we saw is then there was the emergence of, you guessed it, the war on drugs. And so here are a couple periods in our time that we refer to as Reconstruction because we were headed in the right direction. But what happened is that there was what we refer to as a white lash or backlash. There is this sense of less relevance, or maybe this perhaps this idea that there is a replacement agenda, or maybe there's a fear that there is a Browning America, or just a reluctance to make true progress towards what we've aspirationally hoped for as a nation. Whatever the circumstance, we have this tendency as a nation to make progress, but then take it back. And what I submit to you is maybe right now we might be experiencing our third Reconstruction. So I brought a book with me. It's called The Third Reconstruction. So this is my feedback loop. I planned this meticulously. So what I thought was and I got a couple things to share with you too, but what I thought was I'd share a couple thoughts and ideas with you and inform you of some details on some of the things that are happening across the nation, some of the things that are going on that perhaps you were not aware of, that are indicative of this reverse progress that we're making. This is the Reverend Dr. William Barber II, his book. My feedback loop is you too can own this book. I know there's some folks who are watching live and then some folks who are going to watch this recorded. And I've also been in Vermont long enough to know that, hey, we see each other all of the time. A lot of times we pretend like we don't see each other, or we act like we don't see each other. Some of us, you can tell the folks who are new because we're surprised when we see each other. But when you see me, if you are the first one, when you see me and you say, hey, Mark, Third Reconstruction, I want that book. Just walk up to me and say, I saw that program. If you're the first one to contact me after this program, I'm going to hand you, I'm going to keep this book in my backpack. I'm going to hand you a copy of The Third Reconstruction. This is a great book. It's about the moral movement in overcoming politics and division in North Carolina. And I think you'll find it awesome. Let me take you to one slide I have for you right now. This is just an update on dismantling systemic racism. So yeah, just so you know, Thursday, this slide here says April 4th, and I actually should have placed April 11th because it was a 2-week series, so I apologize for that. But the link is the same. If you can, I didn't put a QR code here, but if you can just capture that bit.ly or go over to our social media website, you too can get in on this equal protection and reparations session that we're having on this Thursday. That's this Thursday. Again, this Thursday at 6 p.m. We're going to be at the Richard Kemp Center. And we will also be broadcasting it from the Richard Kemp Center as well. This is about the root causes and impacts of systemic racism and the solutions, including the Vermont Equal Protection Constitutional Amendment. Yeah, there's a Vermont Equal Protection Constitutional Amendment. And there's also a Burlington Reparations Task Force. So come on by, take a look at that. So we got the housekeeping out of the way. Thank you for that slide. I wanted to share with you, I've got this congressional research. This is like a legal sidebar. And this goes back to 2021. It says, following the enactment of the American Rescue Plan, ARPA, earlier this year, several lawsuits have been filed in federal courts alleging that certain race or ex-conscious relief that the ARPA authorizes is unconstitutional on equal protection grounds. So it says these plaintiffs have challenged aspects of the ARPA authorizing the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, this program administered by the Small Business Administration, and also the Loan Forgiveness Plan administered by the Department of Agriculture. Among other requested relief, plaintiffs sought court injunctions to halt their implementation. Now, as the SBA and the USDA began to implement these programs, several federal courts, including a federal court of appeals for the Sixth Circuit, they granted motions to preliminarily or temporarily enjoin the agencies from implementing these programs until litigation is resolved. Why did I read this? So this is kind of the beginning of the end. What we know is, as you saw recently, and we'll get more into it later, but you saw recently where there was a withdrawal of the remnants of affirmative action. Remember earlier we were talking about just the civil rights movement in a lot of the backlash or whitelash that was associated with the movement itself. Almost immediately after affirmative actions was put in place, there began this effort almost as insidiously as that to overturn Roe versus Wade. As a matter of fact, a lot of work was going into how do we go about dismantling this business of affirmative action. And it has been walked back and walked back and walked back. And what many don't understand or know is that the Supreme Court's decision over this last year to eliminate as one criteria of selection process within universities, the use of race, that decision by the Supreme Court was the finalization of the eradication of affirmative action. It has been happening now for decades. That was just the final step. So just so you know, none of this is new. What we see is we have a Supreme Court. Now, when you think of SCOTUS, we call them SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States. If you look at the history of the Supreme Courts of the United States, and as you recall earlier, what I mentioned is that the Supreme Court of the United States, I was talking a little bit about, some of the decisions that have been made and some of the precedent that have been made. I think it's just important also to understand that they have been largely conservative, majority conservative, since the existence of the United States, with one exception. And that is what we refer to as the Warren Court. Right now, currently, we have what we refer to as the Roberts Court, because he is the Chief Justice, and this is a period of time in which he sits as the Chief Justice. Well, when Judge Warren was the Chief Justice, this was the only time in history where we had a majority liberal court. And what we saw from it was the output of that court was hugely impactful, because what we saw was a significant portion of the civil rights activity. That's the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Housing Rights Act of 1968. All of this occurred during that period. Now, currently, what we have is a supermajority. And so it's really hard to tell a supermajority Supreme Court, conservative majority Supreme Court. So as far as we can tell, it's kind of hard to tell a time looking forward in the future where we will not have a majority conservative Supreme Court. What does that mean? Yes, we should know by now, by looking at what's going on with the Supreme Court and some of the decisions that they've made, is the Supreme Court is extremely political. I do have another slide for you, though, while we get into this whole business about the third Reconstruction, because we're in the middle of a backlash. And I think it's important for us to see it for what it is, because we also have to understand the work that we must do while we're in it. So what we do have coming up, just to let you know, on the 18th of April, this is coming up quick, on the 18th of April, just wanted to let you know that over at the Richard Kemp Center, and we're also going to do this one, we're going to do this one hybrid as well, that we're going to have a racial diversity and wealth disparities in Vermont. This is really talking about Act 250. There's a lot of conversations about Act 250. This here, what you can learn is how does exclusionary policy, what factors does it play in keeping Vermont white? But how has it also contributed to wealth disparities? And how can we work towards a more equitable future? Thank you for that slide. So, and just kind of a highlight on that is that what we know about Act 250, most people know very little about Act 250. And some people are talking about it now, especially because it's a housing shortage. Of course, it's a housing shortage. And we've had a housing shortage for some time, but we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. And we're going to talk about what else has been created and what we present and there's a lot of, we got a couple of governors on tape. We've got some testimony that was submitted to legislature a biennium ago. And we've got, some other documentation and conversation that we want to have around presenting to you that, in fact, in 1968, oh, by the way, this was right at the heels of the civil rights movement. In fact, in 1968, what we know was, in addition to Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy being assassinated and the Poor People's Campaign organizing for the first time in D.C., is that multiple dozens, if not hundreds of locations across the United States were literally on fire because of the civil rights movement And also we know that there were bombs that were being dropped in certain neighborhoods by the United States government on black movements and assassinations that were occurring across the United States. But what we decided to do, what we thought was important, was here in Vermont, is that we would implement Act 250. What the policy did is it created an economic component to development. And what we know is most black people are poor, most poor people are white, but most black people are poor. What we see, the evidence is that it at least contributed to the lack of equity, the lack of racial diversity across the state, and definitely as a result of that, the generational wealth that could or would have occurred. Now, that's, of course, in addition to placing a cap on the number of housing that's in Vermont, as well as limiting the influx of the total population and capping it somewhere between 640 to 650,000 people, which also dampened the economic growth of the state. So it's just an example of where when you have any exclusionary policy, at the end of the day, it ends up hurting everybody. So what we ought to be talking about, in addition with Act 250, is how do we go about making changes to Act 250 that also acknowledge the harm that it has done, and as well as repair some of the damage. Check this out. This is a judge in Florida halted the Biden administration's new debt relief program, minority farmers. This is another report earlier this month. Wisconsin judge issued a temporary restraining order blocking implementation of the program, which covers up to 120% of debt for farmers who are members of this group that have historically been discriminated against based upon their race. So yeah, definitely, we're looking through some of the policies, some of the things that are coming out of various states, some of the restrictions that are coming out of various states, and it's frustrating to say the least, because what we're doing is there are, through the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, we're bringing litigation where there are policies that are being put in place to address the disparities that were created by policies. Look at this slide here. So these policies here, so I won't get into all of them, but, just take, for example, the Homestead Act of 1862 that gave away 270 million acres of land to white folks. Or, the Federal Housing Administration exclusionary loan eligibility, or in other words, redlining. Many of us are very familiar with that. Transportation projects, connecting suburbs through black neighborhoods, and on. But many, many policies that created barriers that precluded black folks from obtaining wealth. Thank you for that slide. But when we get ready to create policies now in 2024 to enable black folks to redress some of this, then what we have to deal with is this whole business about the weaponization, if you will, of the Equal Protection Clause. The weaponization of the Equal Protection Clause. We call it race neutral, and this is and for the lawyers who are watching, thank you for watching. But this is that basic analysis and that jurisprudence that goes along with the equal protection interpretation. And all of this has all been propagated, has been promulgated and disseminated by mostly a majority conservative court. And right now where we are is again, we are in the middle of a backlash. Here's some testimony that we submitted, and I'll just read some of it to you. So there's ongoing unprecedented reversals and or significant alterations of civil rights protections previously safeguarded by the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Amendments to create the policies and programs to redress systemic racism and other forms of systemic oppression are largely unable to withstand what has evolved as the equal protection jurisprudence. You see, the equal protection doctrine continues to be exploited by the use of highly complex discriminatory algorithms that further perpetuate systemic racism. Now, it's important to note here that systemic racism and other forms of systemic oppression create wealth disparities and indirectly affect health and wellness. They threaten economic growth and development, and they ultimately get this, they actually place democracy at risk. So while the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause has provided a legal framework for challenging disparate outcomes created by systemic racism, its effectiveness is limited by various factors, including the judicial interpretation, enforcement challenges, intersectional issues, and the need for a broader societal change. Addressing systemic racism requires a comprehensive approach that includes legal, legislative, social, and cultural efforts to promote equity, justice, and equality for all. So here's the deal. It goes back to the basic analysis doctrine, as those of you who've been watching, when we had Professor Teach out here, we had a brief conversation about this. It's otherwise known as a rational basic review. It's the standard for the judicial review applied by courts when assessing laws challenged under the Equal Protection Clause. See, under the doctrine, courts typically defer to the legislative discretion and uphold laws as long as they are rationally related to a legitimate government interest. This standard tends to make it more difficult to successfully challenge laws or policies that result in disparate outcomes due to systemic racism. So again, the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, with the use of the basic analysis doctrine, enables the ability to construct new discriminatory algorithms that further perpetuate systemic racism, producing indefensible disparate outcomes. So we went in and provided some testimony on, yep, you guessed it, we've requested a constitutional amendment here in the state of Vermont. And I think we've talked about that before. That constitutional amendment, what it would do is it would just simply, for the first time, place on the books here in Vermont a legitimate equal protection clause in the state of Vermont. I want to just pause there for a minute, take you over to this. Check this out real quick. Oh, Sankofa. So Sankofa is kind of like going back to get it. That's that and Dinkwa language that we use. We're going back. We are going back. We are going back to the National Museum of African American History and Culture. You can scan that if you're watching right now. You can scan that because we're still collecting donations on getting down there. Excuse me. It's going to be a blast. We took some youth. I had some video to show you, but I decided to stay away from that tonight and just talk a little bit more about the third Reconstruction. Thanks for that slide. So again, much more to share with you. Here you see DEI. The Supreme Court declines to hear a case over race-neutral measures allegedly intended to increase racial diversity. This right here is the battle that's happening on DEI across the United States. Some onlookers, and I'm quoting you here from Ogletree Deacons, says some onlookers had anticipated that the Supreme Court would use the Coalition for TJ case to provide more clarity regarding the permissibility of race-neutral admissions policies to increase diversity after the majority in the SFFA decision opined with little direction that even race-neutral measures could still be unlawful. So this right here just left open questions of whether facially race-neutral measures intended to improve diversity that changes are or are intended to change the racial representation and admissions offers are unlawful. So this right here, this is just yet another issue where there's an ongoing fight with DEI. Here's another one. This is the Alabama bans diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in departments for public institutions. This is, Alabama has joined a growing list of states. Did you know that DEI programs are under just very, very close scrutiny? A measure, this law I think, what is the name of this? This is Governor Kay Ivey signed it. It's called SB 109, a measure that limits DEI programs, and also they say divisive concepts is what they refer to. So this is just a huge deal that's going on right now. This is not the only state. Just know that Florida, Idaho, Kansas, North Carolina, North Dakota, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, they have all passed laws restricting DEI programs. So there's a serious backlash. I know that even with some of the work that we're doing here in the state, as we looked to address the work in the Land Access Opportunity Board, there were some parameters and restrictions that were placed on some of that work because of concerns for constitutional backlashes. I think what I'll close with, though, is here as we continue to talk in the third Reconstruction, and thank you for coming, for those who've come. Mark Hughes, this is the Juxtaposition, third Reconstruction. Wanted to encourage you, if you see me, tell me you saw this episode. If you're first, I'll hand you this book. There is a proposal for a constitutional amendment. The constitutional amendment is an equal protection clause, that the people are guaranteed equal protection under the law, that the state shall not deny equal treatment and respect under the law on account of a person's race, ethnicity, sex, religion, disability, sexual orientation, gender, identity, gender expression, or national origin. Nothing in this article is interpreted or applied to prevent the adoption or implementation of measures intended to provide equality of treatment and opportunity for members of groups that have historically been subjected to discrimination. That is the language of the constitutional amendment. It has passed out of Senate Judiciary, which means it will be on the floor, I believe, next Tuesday. I think it's in its second day on the calendar right now. It must be on the calendar for 5. It must clear the House. After a hearing in the House, it must come back and clear the House and come back to the Senate before this is over. This is where our attention should be. So I thank y'all for coming out. That's it. It's been a wrap today. Equal protection. It's a big deal. Why are we still talking? We just amended the Constitution a couple years ago to abolish slavery again. Now we're talking about equal protection. Now one was 13th Amendment. Now we're in the 14th Amendment. Why are we still revisiting these constitutional amendments that happened over 160 years ago? It's because we're in a third Reconstruction, because it's a backlash. It's a white lash. That's where we are today. Thanks for coming. These are issues affecting black folks and black folks affecting change. Juxtaposition. Thanks. We'll see you next time.
My people with me, together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear freedom calling me to answer? Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my